waiting a few more minutes to make sure everyone gets online, and then we'll begin. Okay, I might start. My name is Angela. I work at Onkaparinga Libraries, and today I have Eve with us, who's the co-host.
Hello.
And, hi, and of course we have Josephine Moon with us too.
Hello.
So firstly, I'd like to say, if you want to ask any questions throughout the event, at the bottom of your screen you'll see a Q&A, but a tab, and you can click on that and ask questions. And at the end of the event, Eve will ask all the questions of the panel, the guests. So there is a chat function there too, but if you use a Q&A, we'll be able to manage all the questions better that way. I'd like to thank Penguin Random House for allowing us to have Josephine with us today. I'd also like to thank QBD Books. So you can actually purchase the book through QBD, or you can put the book on hold through the library. So you can put it on hold over the phone, you can jump online and put it on hold, or you can come in and visit us and put it on hold. So we have lots of copies available. So they're all the different ways you can put it on hold, or you can buy it, as I've said. So that's about it. So I want to warmly welcome Josephine and thank you for joining us tonight. I was interested because I haven't read much of this genre of books, so I thought it would be interesting to give it a go. And after reading it, I thought, oh, I wonder what else you've written. And I've noticed you write a lot of books that are all about baking and cooking, which is a good, unique angle. And so can you tell us what came first, your love of baking? Because I know also when I looked online that you'd won 2 awards for your baking. One for some jam and Persian cake at a show, 2 shows. So I wanted to know, did you decide to write about cooking first and then you entered shows and won, or did you always like cooking?
Great question. So I wrote for about 12 years before I got a book contract, and that first book that was published was called The Tea Chest. And I was a huge fan of tea, and the idea for that story had come to me just while I was in a tea shop, sniffing all the little, display things of tea, and it suddenly occurred to me that it was somebody's job to design tea blends, and I just thought that was the most fabulous job. I thought that would just be so much fun. So by the time I got home, I sort of had this idea in my head for this story about a tea designer who needs to go to London, leave Brisbane and go to London and set up a new tea shop. So I had so much fun writing that book, and had no idea whether that book would ever be published or not. And then when it was picked up for publication, I was given a 2-book deal, so I had to write something else. And I sort of thought, well, I really, really enjoyed writing about tea because I really love the research aspects of books. It is absolutely my happy place. It's my most favourite thing to do. And so I thought, well, I'm going to carry on writing about food. And of course I chose chocolate because why wouldn't you? Because the research is just brilliant. Like I tell you, I literally imported chocolate from overseas and claimed it as a tax deduction, as genuine research. It was just so much fun. So I ate a lot of chocolate for that one, and went and did a chocolate making course and just had a really, really good time. So yeah, it just kind of kept going from there. I just thought, well, this is my thing. This is the thing that sets me apart from other contemporary fiction writers in the country. And so it was sort of while I was on tour promoting The Tea Chest, people kept asking me, well, what is it? What is it? What sort of book is it? But I sort of came up with this idea of, well, it's foodie lit, it's foodie fiction, it's stories based around food themes. So definitely the writing came first. In terms of the competition wins, that's been a very recent addition and a most enjoyable one. But it came about because of the research I was doing to begin with for next year's book, which is actually currently called The Jam Queen. Its title might change, but it has jam as a theme running through it. And it follows a family of women who are all jam queens, competitive jam makers in the Barossa Valley. And so as part of that research, I felt like I really needed to do what my characters were doing. I needed to know what that was like to enter competitions and fill out the forms and drop off the stuff and all of that. So I happened to teach myself to make jam off the internet, and entered it into the Royal Brisbane Show, and it won first prize, which believe me, no one was more shocked about that than I was, but it was tremendously good fun. And then because that was so much good fun, I decided to put a cake into my next local show up here, and yeah, that got second prize too. So I've had a good time with that so far. I think I might be a bit addicted to entering shows now with food.
That's fantastic. I love that story. What inspired you to write the book Cake Maker's Wish?
So in 2015, I took a research trip to the Cotswolds. And the reason I went to the Cotswolds was because I'm a very intricate world builder in my stories. So I have a lot of detail in terms of setting and places and shops and all of those kinds of things. I really make things very, very, alive in that sense. So I look for very beautiful places because I'm inspired by beautiful places. I have to spend a lot of time with a book. It takes a couple of years to get a book out. So I want it to be a beautiful place that I want to return to keep writing. And if I feel like that, then I think my readers probably feel like that as well. So I'd seen enough photos of the Cotswolds to know that it was completely gorgeous and I would absolutely love it. And it's kind of right up my alley. I really love sort of vintage things and historic things and those, teas and cakes and all those sort of beautiful things. So it was right up my alley. So I decided to go, and I managed to convince my dad and my sister and her 14-month-old baby to come with me to the Cotswolds. And we went over for a couple of weeks. And while we were over there, we based ourselves in a cottage in one of the villages. So the Cotswolds made up of a number of villages. And I think it was built in the 1700s, this cottage. And it was just it was a lovely thing to do. I mean, it was practically a lot easier too because, we had a baby and stuff, so it was just still a bit difficult to be traveling, but it was really nice because it meant that every time we went out of the house and went into the village, we started seeing the same people, running into the same faces and starting to make connections with people. And so the woman who lived in the cottage next to where we were staying asked me one day what I did, and I said I was a writer. And she said, oh, you should meet Terry and Brian. They've lived here their whole life. They're in their 70s. And they have the greatest stories about growing up here in the 50s. So I said, yeah, absolutely. I'd love to meet them because in terms of research, people are always your greatest asset. You'll never get better source material than you will out of an actual person who has stories to tell. So I went over. I wish I'd taken a tape recorder because they were just so fascinating and hilarious and had just the best stories. But I wrote, things down as fast as I could. So they were telling me, all these great stories about growing up in the 50s, but very quickly it became obvious that they were also incredibly sad that their village was no longer what it was when they were kids. And they explained that, when they were kids, there was a lord and lady of the manor who owned the whole village and everybody rented their properties off them. Everybody worked to be part of the community. So it was a very self-sustaining community, very tight-knit community. They grew their own food, they manufactured their own things. And then after, somebody died and somebody got divorced and there was death taxes and there was this, that and the other, the village got sold off. So it got cut up into lots of little pieces and sold off. And at that point, what happened was that people who lived in London, say, would buy these cottages as weekenders or holiday rentals, but they didn't actually live there for the majority of the time, which meant that for the majority of the time, all these houses sat empty. And there was basically a big drain out of the village, and there was no longer enough people there to keep it as a sustainable working village. They weren't self-sufficient anymore. They had to go further and further away to find employment. And basically that sort of, utopian little village that was in their mind wasn't there anymore. And I got back to my cottage and I just thought, I felt really sad. I really felt their sadness, and I thought, I really want to bring this village back to life. And even if that's just on the page. So I set about sort of setting up this idea where we could bring back people into the village and revive it and try and regain some of what they'd had in the 50s. So that's where it started.
I was, without giving too much of it away, the Renaissance project, the words just sounded so intriguing. So I always Google things. I sort of think I'll Google that, see if it's real. And there has been places in Europe where they've tried to do things like that, which I thought was interesting. So have you done any research around that whole?
No, well, originally, so in 2015, it was literally just it was just an idea I had, or I thought, well, this would be great if we could do this. And I was sort of a bit stuck on the practicalities of it, of well, how legally do you do this? How do you make that happen? And then while I was working on the first draft, I actually got 50,000 words in, which is about halfway through. And I just realized that the first draft that I had at that time wasn't working, and I couldn't work out why it wasn't working, but it wasn't working. And I had to actually abandon the draft at that point because I was sort of too far in we just had to sort of abandon it. And I left it and I went on and wrote 3 Gold Coins instead, which is set in Italy. And what I actually did was take out the sisters who happened to be in that first draft in the Cotswolds, and I put them over in Italy. So when I went back to that story a few years later, I still had all of the village there, all of the supporting characters, all the buildings, all the setting, it was all there ready to go. And I just needed a new character to sort of parachute into that village and see it play out. But yes, since then, of course, I've seen, Italy have done their €1 castles and houses and things. And there's an island off Ireland, Arranmore, which has been asking people to come over from Australia and the US to go and work remotely because for exactly the same reasons. They've had this population drain, and these villages and this island are not supporting themselves anymore, and they want to bring people back. So yeah, I was clearly just ahead of my time in 2015.
Yeah, you were. Yeah, it is a very nice book to read. It's a feel-good type of book, but it has got some interesting depth to it in the sense with gender and toys. Like a lot of parents will relate to that when they're choosing toys for their children, and also raising boys and single parenting. So there was that sort of theme underneath. Was that always the intention to have that type of theme, or did like the characters, were they always going to be that? How do you come up with the character the way they are? Like, does it evolve when the book's going along, or is it quite good to see some of that in there because it's stuff that's happening in the modern world today?
No, so I'm always very surprised by characters. Well, characters for me either turn up in one of 2 ways. They either turn up kind of fully formed, full of life, and I'm just blown away by them. And if that happens, I'm really grateful and I'm really happy because it makes my job so much easier. They don't tend, unfortunately for me, they don't tend to turn up in my main characters. They tend to turn up that way in supporting characters. The exception of which was my 3rd novel, The Beekeeper's Secret. The main character in that, Maria Lindsay, who's 73-year-old former nun hiding away at the top of a mountain with a very big secret. She just turned up really, really strongly. Like every time I sat at the computer, it was like she was sitting here with me. It was just such a joy to write that book because she was just so strong and made the book so easy. So I have a real soft spot for that book just because she as a character just felt so real. In this book, Helg, so Olivia's my main character. Olivia has a 7-year-old son, and her son's father, his name's Helg, who lives in Norway. And Helg turned up really strongly. Literally, there's a moment where she opens the door to him, and from the second she opened that door, I was just like, oh, Helg! Like, he just had such a strong presence. And Madeline McCarthy, who is also, I think, about 72 and has lived in that village her whole life, she was also a very, very strong, kind of fully formed presence. But Olivia herself, and probably Darcy as well, mostly Olivia, really took several drafts for me to get to know her, and she probably ended up fairly differently than she was in the first draft because you know, it's a funny thing. I always say getting to know characters is like making new friends. And the only way that you make new friends and learn about them is to spend time with them. So it can take, you know, quite a few drafts and putting them through different sort of challenges and obstacles and situations to really see what they're made of. But there is always a point in writing a book where a character, you know, eventually has so much sort of spirit and energy, I guess, that you just sort of start to hear what they're saying. You move from this place of trying to conjure what they're saying and get to this point of just writing down what they are saying, which is a really, really lovely place to get to. It's that's what I call the writer's high, and it's what I chase all the time, is that moment of, yeah, being that sort of connected to those characters. So no, none of it's planned. Basically, I'm not a good planner. I'm quite a pantser. Everyone's on a spectrum between being a plotter or a pantser, so you're never 100, you know, that way. And I'm very strong on structure, but what happens within the sort of beats of that structure is really open to a lot of negotiation between me and my characters, because sometimes they do things that I don't want them to do or need them to do, and it becomes a bit like herding cats or chickens and just trying to get them to go where you want them to go and do what they want to do. But, you know, they've got a real life force of their own. So, and often, not always, but often they're a lot smarter than I am too, and they know what the book needs, whereas I don't. I just sort of try and keep up a lot of the time, but I do spend an awful lot of time in editing, because I sort of go off in all different directions. It means I spend a lot of time rewriting, which is I don't enjoy at all. It's a lot of work.
When you finish your book, did you think of did you regret any part of it, or did you want to change any part of it? Because after reading it, I was happy with the ending, and I do think you chose the right ban. But did you think about that as well?
No, definitely not. By the time I get to that final draft, and this book was quite a journey. It really did go through, because it started in one space in 2015 with completely different main characters and completely different things going on. And then there was a point, as you've talked about, so I knew that Olivia would probably have some kind of relationship in the Cotswolds. And then as I was going along, I thought I knew who that person was. And then a second man kind of put up his hand and went, no, I think I want to be with Olivia. And I was like, oh, that's never happened to me before. That was really unusual. But I went with it because my characters always know better than I do. So I went with that. And then the craziest thing happened, which was a third guy put up his hand and went, actually, I really want to be with Olivia. And things got pretty hectic there for a while. And I was really struggling to manage all these men, because that's, writing romance is not my number one storyline. So I'm not that sort of proficient with it. And it was just kind of crazy. It was nothing I expected. So that really got really confusing for a while. And what happened in the end was that I had to write out the third man because it was all just too much. And I realised eventually that Harry, his name had walked into the wrong book. So Harry actually belongs in next year's book in The Jam Queen. So that is where he is right now, and he's good over there. He's happy. I'm happy with him over there. All is well in the world. And yes, Olivia finally got to be with the person she was meant to be with. But it did get very, very crazy there for a while.
It certainly did. My last question to you before we go over to the audience is, I noticed on your website too that you're a supporter of Story Dogs. Is it? Yep, Story Dogs and the Smith family. And I wondered I know what the Smith family does, but the audience might not. But I don't know anything about the Story Dogs and what it means to you.
Yeah, well, Story Dogs I first came across Story Dogs when I had my first golden retriever called Daisy, and my son was very, very young, and I'm not really entirely sure how I came across them, but they are an organisation that team humans with their dogs, and so they're a human dog team, and they send them into schools with young readers who are still learning to read, and they volunteer and they go in, and so it's usually they spend time with the kids who are reluctant readers or struggling, or, you know, have anxiety around reading, and they read to the dogs. And the dogs, you know, of course, are a completely non-judgmental listening ear, and they tend to relax the kids and make the kids smile. And so they're really helping kids work through that sort of early reluctance to reading, which is, you know, I'm a former teacher, I'm a mum of a boy, you know, kids, literacy, animals, it all just sort of, you know, all comes together for me because I'm a huge animal lover as well. So I loved that. And so I wanted to originally volunteer with my dog Daisy, but when I read through the behaviour characteristics and abilities they needed, I realised that there was no way Daisy was going to pass that test because she was way too excitable. So then, yeah, then when my son first started prep, I'm not sure, I came across them again, and I just thought, you know, I really want to support that. So now I sponsor a team with a sensible dog to go and read to little kids in schools. Yeah, so yeah, I love them. So they do a great job.
And the Smith family do a lot of stuff too. We've got the Smith family here that do an after school club for homework help. And that's run at a few of our libraries in Onkaparinga as well. So I know they do some amazing things.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are really familiar with, you know, sponsoring a child overseas, and then maybe are unaware that there's, you know, an awful lot of kids in Australia who actually need that sponsorship as well. And we can sponsor kids, you know, in our own backyard as well. And yeah, just to help, mostly, you know, helping them get those sort of extras, like making sure they've got shoes and making sure they've got lunch and making sure that, yeah, they can get homework help or they can go on excursions, all those sort of extra things that actually add up to quite a lot over the course of a year, so they don't get left out and get left behind. So yeah, I think they do a great job. I actually came across them sort of by accident as well. I was invited to present like a keynote speech at a fundraising event for the Smith family down the Gold Coast, and I don't think I had a clear idea of what they did before I went down, and then I sort of went down, I researched them, and I thought, oh, you guys are amazing. So then I became a sponsor as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hand over to Eve.
So Josephine, we've had a few questions come through from the audience, and the first one is something I've actually wondered myself a little bit. Do you get to pick your own book cover designs? Yeah,
everyone always wants to ask this, and it's a really, really good question. No, authors, generally speaking, have no input into their covers at all. So cover meetings happen inside publishing houses, and apparently the phrase I've been given is blood is shed. It is like a big, big deal choosing book covers for books, because it is the #1 marketing tool a book has. And, you know, I'm not a graphic designer, you know, it's not my forte. So I think, you know, authors, generally speaking, probably shouldn't have too much input into them unless you are a graphic designer or an artist or something and you've got that kind of background. It's a, you know, a skill set in itself. However, for this particular book, the publishers did come up with a different cover, and I did love it. It was very beautiful, but, and I sort of said, yes, I'm fine with that. But it was sort of nagging at me for several weeks, this sort of little voice inside me saying, it needs cake, it needs cake. And I was very lucky. I rang my publisher and I said, I've just got this nagging feeling, it's not quite right and we need cake on the cover. And she said, well, there was one we looked at that had a cake on it, and they dismissed it for some reason. I can't remember what. It was something that they could fix. She said, I'll send you, you know, what we had. And she sent me that, and I just went, oh no, that is the cover. Please, can we have that cover? And so that's what they did. And that cover has just received so much love. Like, people say that they want to lick it, they want to put it on their wall. It's been a very, very loved cover. So yeah, I'm really grateful that they jumped on and took my request to change it. So yeah, happy with that.
Some interesting insight into the publishing world.
Yeah.
And another question, actually a pair of questions that came through when you very first started talking. What is your favourite tea and what is your favourite chocolate?
So I am a huge fan of chai. And if anyone's read The Tea Chest, you know, I talk about chai a lot in The Tea Chest, or my character Kate talks about chai a lot. So masala chai specifically is my favourite chai. And I'm literally drinking some right now. Actually, there's literally none left. So I finished that just before we started talking. My favourite brand right now is called the Fresh Chai Co. You'll find them online. The guy who runs it is in Montville, so I'm in Noosa Hinterland, he's in Montville, so he's about, I don't know, 40-minute drive from my house right now. And what he does is he imports tea. You have to import tea because mostly all tea is grown overseas. We do have some up in North Queensland. But anyway, he imports the tea and then grinds all the spices fresh and then long soaks it in honey and then mixes the tea leaves with the honey, and the honey preserves all the spices and everything together so that it is so fresh when it goes, because otherwise they add, you know, powdered spices, and it just doesn't, they don't keep, you know, the freshness and the flavour and everything. So it is amazing. It is the best, hands down, the best chai I've ever had. So that's my favourite tea. As for chocolate, you know, I was a huge fan. Oh, I shouldn't say who I was a huge fan of. I might not do that. My favourite chocolate has changed recently. I was a really fan of a particular brand of organic chocolate that have recently changed their recipe, and it's just not sitting with me anymore. So to be honest, I can't really go past Lindt 70%. I just think it's pretty much a perfect chocolate. And chocolate is good for you. It's absolutely true. It has lots and lots of great health benefits, but it does have to be 70%, I'm sorry to say, at least, to get those health benefits. So most of what you see on the shelf won't actually be good for you, but anything 70% or over is good for you. So yeah, Lindt is my current go-to.
There we go. Josephine Moon says that chocolate is healthy, so I'm going to take her advice.
It absolutely is.
The next question. I noticed in your biography that you studied environmental science. Does this mean that being an author wasn't your first career choice?
Well, it depends how far back you go. If you go back to when I was very little and probably up to year 11, I wanted to be a vet because I'm a huge animal lover and I live with a lot of animals. But in year 11, it was quite clear that physics and I were never going to get along. And at that point, you needed physics to get into vet science, which to this day still really irks me because, okay, I couldn't deal with physics, but I did actually top biology, and biology you would think would be a far more useful life science to be a vet with. But anyway, that's my little grievance there going back to when I was 16. So I was sort of grieving that for quite a long time. And then I guess I think when I got to year 12 uni, you just sort of had to put in, you had to put in choices for uni basically. And my second love, I guess at the time, was sort of, the environment and nature. So I put in environmental science. So I went off to do environmental science, and it was very close to my heart, definitely, but I wanted to specialise in ecology. And a big part of ecology is actually statistics. And it became quite clear to me that statistics and I were never going to get on. And at that point, I had to sort of go, all right, what's going on here? Like, where are my actual strengths and talents in what I'm doing here? And it was pretty clear to me that I was a writer and a communicator. So I changed my degree to do journalism and film and media. And then I got really excited about that because I realised that with that tool, which is an arts degree, can we say, while the government's just slashing arts degrees all over the place. Journalism is an arts degree, which is a pretty important one, I would think. But I realised that I could write about whatever topic I loved and was passionate about. And that was really freeing. I thought, well, this is great. This is a really versatile tool that I can put, wherever I'm really interested, or take wherever I'm really interested in. So yeah, that's how I ended up there. But then I became a teacher so I did a graduate diploma in education. My first year teaching, I went to do my first writing course with Queensland Writers Centre. And it was during that course that I just went, oh, this is it. Like, this is absolutely it. I want to be a career writer. But that took another 12 years of writing to get a publishing deal and a professional career. So yeah, I've had a very, very diverse working history. I worked as an editor, I worked as a teacher, and I've trained engineers in corporate environments to communicate, better than they were doing. You know, written features. I've run a charity. I've walked dogs, made pieces. I've done you know, a huge amount of things, which is actually great because it gives me lots of material to draw on for characters and different roles and things like that as well. So I'm sure my parents were just like, can you just choose something, stick to it, just do something? But there you go. It's all worked to my favour now because I can draw on lots of experience from around the place.
Great. We've got a couple more questions that have come through. The first and most important one is, where did you get that necklace?
I'm so glad you asked. This is from Ruby Olive. So Ruby Olive and I did like a great, awesome cross promotion this year where I sent them some books to put with, and they wrapped them up with jewelry packages, and they were sending out a lot of care packages and things during the early stages of COVID, which was pretty cool. And then they sent me some of these are the Maasai beads. So these are the wooden beads. And yeah, they sent me some Maasai beads and I just love them. They're so great. And I particularly love them with this dress. They're just, the colours just are so great. And of course they sort of match my cover and my painting and the whole deal. So yes, thank you for asking that. Yes, Ruby Olive. Ruby Olive online. You will find them on Facebook and their website as well.
I think I'll have to go have a look at their stuff.
Jewelry, really good.
Now the next question that's coming. You did talk a little bit about the next book that you've got coming up, but are you able to share anything else, or is it all top secret?
Well, it's nothing really that it's top secret. It's more that I just change so much of what I'm writing, but it's definitely, what won't change is that it's set. Well, my family of jam queens come from the Barossa Valley. They are competitive jam queens, but there's a fair bit of tension in that family for various reasons. And I also send them on the GAN, so the Great GAN train that goes from Darwin down to Adelaide. And I send them on a family trip on the GAN. So it's a lovely little pressure cooker for if you're in a very tiny space. So if you've got some issues with people, they're probably going to perhaps erupt a little bit on that train. So that's round about all I can say at the moment, because I'm right now, I'm in between first draft and second draft, and that's really when I start pulling the whole thing apart and putting it all back together again. And I'm deleting characters and I'm changing plot lines, and these are the parts of writing that I really dislike. It's really hard work, and it hurts. It hurts to slash, 30,000 words or so out of a book and rewrite them, but it always gets there in the end. So I can tell you more, but honestly, it could all just be deleted on the editing floor very soon. So yeah, but that's the gist at the moment.
Yeah, I bet it hurts. That's a lot of work to get cut. One last question that's come through. Josephine, how much time do you spend each day on your writing?
Yeah, it is a good question. I wish I could easily quantify it. I don't really know, because it tends to go in peaks and troughs more than a consistent line. What I do try and do is defend quite rigorously the hours between 9 a.m. and midday, because they are the hours of the day when I've got sort of the most brain capacity and probably the least likely to be disturbed during that time. So I try and defend those hours quite rigorously for actual writing time. And then writers do lots and lots and lots of things that aren't actually writing, specifically creating words. So those things sort of I slot in different times when I'm, possibly have less coherent time, or, I'm going to get disturbed, or I'm a bit more tired or something, things that I can do that don't require quite as much brain activity. So that has only worked, but when I first got my contract, when I first signed with an agent, my son was 6 weeks old. So most of my career has actually been spent juggling a baby or a very small child. And I've only recently just sort of being able to sink into the great joy of having school hours, which is just lovely, regular, kind of fairly reliable hours. That's been just great. That has really made my life a lot easier. So yeah, I'm really enjoying that.
I have one more question.
Yes.
You've written 8 books.
Yes.
And 6 of them are fiction. What were your 2 non-fiction titles about?
So the first one, I mentioned in there that I ran a charity at one point. So I founded and ran a horse rescue charity, and was while I was running that charity, did that for 3 years. Someone in Penguin actually noticed my writing online and asked me if I would write a book on horse rescue. So that was just a really, really lovely surprise. And so, of course, I said, yes, I'd love to do that. So I collected a whole heap of stories from people who'd rescued horses. And my theme of the book was, that we often rescue a horse, but it's actually the horse that rescues us more often than not. So that's what that book is about. And then I did one last year. I'm a great student. I'm not saying I'm a great student. I'm a committed student of Buddhist philosophy. So I wrote one last year that's about Buddhism and
meat,
how it relates to how we eat.
Yeah,
Like
I looked at that one and I thought, oh, that's a very unusual topic considering your fiction writings.
Yeah. I have so many interests. I have more books I can deal with than I can deal with at any given time. So hopefully that means I will be writing, steadily for the rest of my life, where I just churn through them and knock them off one at a time.
Excellent. So is there any more questions, Eve, or is that there?
No, that's all the questions that came in.
Excellent.
Okay.
That's awesome. So did you want to say anything else at all, Josephine?
No, other than just say thank you so much for having me, and thank you to everybody who buys my books, reads my books, supports my work, and shares the love with other people. It means a lot, and it's just it's a great privilege to write stories that other people read and enjoy, and send me messages saying how much they love them. It's a that's a really lovely thing. So I'm always really grateful for that, and I never take it for granted. So thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you. And for all our audience out there, we will be sending out a link with a survey, so you can give us some feedback about this event. And also, if you've got other events you'd like to suggest, you can do that too. You can follow us on Facebook, and you'll be able to keep up with all our events on Facebook or on our website. So we promote everything in them two places. We've got a couple more author events coming up in the near future, so keep a lookout for them. And yes, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, audience, for staying for the session. And yeah, thanks. Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.